Today we're going to be talking about natural selection class. The definition of natural selection is the process by which forms of life having traits that better enable them to adapt to specific environmental pressures as predators, changes in environment, or competition for food, or mates tend to survive and reproduce in greater numbers than others of their kind, thus ensuring their perpetuation of those favorable traits in succeeding generations. This clearly states that if you have genes that enable you to survive your environment, that's climate change, food competition, reproduction, those traits will be favorable and chosen. Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, a lot of people credit him with natural selection. He's done a lot of founding research laying the groundwork for natural selection as we know it today. He lived from 1809 to 1882. He wrote The Origin of Species numerous times, each time refuting the findings he has found and his idea of natural selection. And he believed that everything came from a common ancestor. Charles Darwin helped coin the term natural selection, but it cannot be proven that he was the one who actually said natural selection first. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, also around Darwin's time, 1744 to 1829, a little bit before Darwin, he believed that favorable traits were passed on as well, but those favorable traits were gained over a lifetime. So, for example, the most famous one is giraffe stretching its neck. So a giraffe eats all the leaves on the bottom of trees, needs to get the leaves at the top of the trees, reaches up, stretches his neck, gets his neck longer, gets to the top of the trees, and eats the leaves. He reproduces, and the long neck is passed on to the next generation. This is not true, however. You do not pass on traits you gain throughout a lifetime. The changes throughout a lifetime does not change your DNA. So let's say I work out at a gym all the time, I become buff, reproduce. Is my baby automatically going to come out muscular, big, tone? No. It doesn't change the DNA. You can change your body over time, but it does not change your DNA. Survival of the fittest is probably the most common thing with natural selection. Most people believe it's the biggest, fastest, strongest, but that's not true. Fitness is actually relative. Fitness is the ability to pass on the genetic code. So the ability to pass on DNA is the fitness. For example, the most famous example of survival of the fittest is the peppered moss. So let's say we have a tree, 50% black moss, 50% white moss, but the tree is white, grayish color on the bark. Which moth is the fittest? Birds come along on our white tree, white moss, black moss, and they eat the moss, but the blacks stand out. So they eat more black than white. That means there's more genes for white in the population. That means white's the fittest. Now, there's a change in habitat. Industrial revolution occurs. The buildings give off a soot, and the trees turn black, dark gray. Now which moth survives? The black moths survive because they blend in better. White moths get eaten. New fitness is selected. That means white used to be the fittest, and now black is the fittest. This is known as directional selection, or choosing one extreme over the other. So white is an extreme, black is an extreme. You're choosing those over another. Darwin actually came up with his biggest find when he was at the Galapagos Islands and he discovered finches. Galapagos Islands, small chain of islands in South America, warm climate. He noticed they're similar finches, but each had a different beak. This made him question whether they came from a common ancestor and evolved, or there was just a bunch of different species of finches. The beak types pertain with certain food requirements. Some beaks are thick, better for nuts, others thin to get into flowers and pollen. Each island had different food sources, so each bird on that island had a different beak. DNA codes for the beak, so obviously natural selection was occurring and DNA was selected for those beaks with different ones. This is a change over time. One species, a finch, flew in from the mainland, a hurricane, something blew them off the mainland onto the first island, and that first island selected for the extreme. They reproduce for a big beak. Big beak gets selected, like our moths, so more big beaks are living than little beaks. So directional selection again, selecting one extreme or the large beak over the small beak. The island selects for the large beak, and then the birds' population gets too big, they fly to the next island, but this time the island has a different food source and requires the small beak, beak type 2. The small beak is in the population, but not as popular, not as frequent as the big beak. So now the directional selection on island 2 is going the other way, selecting for the other extreme or the small beak. Over time, the big beak on island 1 and small beak on island 2 will become so separate they will become new species. This continues for each of the Galapagos Islands. So, in review, natural selection is the ability to pass on genes to help you survive better in your climate, whether that's food sources, whether that's being faster than the predators, whether that's being slower than the predators, better camouflage. Charles Darwin's the founder, credited with terms of survival of the fittest. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck almost had the right idea, but most of the people now kind of just make fun of him with Lamarckism as, oh, haha, not really, you don't pass on traits you gained over a lifetime, you have to be in your DNA. But both of them believed in a common ancestor. Survival of the fittest, relative, but still works as long as you realize that fittest is the ability to pass on the genetic code. It means fitness is relative, it means you have better camouflage, worse camouflage. And this, survival of the fittest, and natural selection can change populations over time, much like the finches, where they came in with one, food resources happened, chose for a second one, went to a different island, different food resources happened, chose for another one, continued on for all the islands. So my citation source. If you guys have any questions, feel free to go to this. It's posted online. If you guys have any questions, feel free to come see me after class.